I'm Jessie, and today I want to talk to you all about some YA books that I absolutely love and think are perfect for older or adult readers. So I know a lot of times I'll talk about a YA book and say that I feel like it skews older. And that's because some YA books like really ride that line between adult and young adult. Like they really kind of move past that young adult age range that I think of as like typical young adult. So like your teenagers. And while the main characters in these books that I'm going to talk about are also like younger, they are teenagers, that doesn't necessarily mean that they read young. We're not talking about like 16-year-olds acting like 30-year-olds. We're talking about these books that have like some darker themes and that are just a little bit more, a little older than like what I think of as typical YA. So yeah, these books are ones that I think are really good YA books for older readers like myself. I am 30 and I still really enjoy these books. I don't feel like they are too young for me or immature or what have you. I really enjoy these and I think they read well for a slightly older audience. The first one I want to talk about is This Savage Song by B.E. Schwab. I read this and the second one is the Duology, The Monsters of Verity, last year, and I absolutely loved it. It is such a cool story and it's pretty dark for a YA book, I'm not gonna lie. There's definitely like grief and trauma, and it's a really good book, and it's really different. I think like there's not a lot of romantic overtones or even undertones in this book, specifically in the first one. And I really enjoyed that. I appreciated that not all YA books need romance. So that was really good for me. In this book, we follow Kate and August. Kate is the daughter of basically a mob boss, and August is the son of basically a revolutionary, and they are on two opposite sides of this like eternal like battle for this city, and we kind of follow both of them and see how their lives end up colliding. And in this world there are monsters, so the monsters are created by acts of human violence, and I just think that's a really fascinating way to look at monsters and human violence, is by when somebody commits an atrocious act, a monster is created, and that monster takes on a life of its own. And it's just a really good story. I did a full review for this whole series. If you want to go check that out, I highly recommend it. But this is one that I think is fantastic for older readers. Another one is the Gilded Ones by Namina Forna. I just raved about this book recently, and I just did a full review on the arc that I received from NetGalley. But this is such a good story. It is a very dark YA book, and even in my review I say like definitely feel like this could have been an adult book based on the themes and just the violence and some of the issues that we face in this book. I really think that this definitely borders more on an adult fantasy. And in this book, we follow Dika, who is a 16-year-old girl. And in her culture, when girls turn 16, they are tested. They have their blood tested to see if they are pure or if they are a demon. If they are a demon, which means they bleed gold, then they are killed. Well, Dika ends up being a demon. And she is kind of taken away by this mysterious person that she doesn't really know, and given the opportunity to fight in the war for this empire. And it is just good. I absolutely loved it. I loved Dika. I loved the found family aspect. All the girls that we get to kind of follow and get to know in this story. And I just really, really enjoyed it. So go check out that full review if you want to learn more about this book. Another one that I think works really well for adult readers is Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. For one, it's a Brandon Sanderson book. And I know a lot of people, at least in my circles that read adult fantasy, read Brandon Sanderson. And I feel like it's really not that surprising to see that a lot of adult Brandon Sanderson readers also will read his YA book. And this is actually a YA sci-fi, and it is just so much fun. I loved this book. I loved Spensa, and she was pretty much a typical teenage girl. Like, she's got angst and anger, and she makes some dumb decisions, but I absolutely love her as well. And I love our talking spaceship imbot, and then we get to follow just this crew of kids as they're learning to be pilots, and Spensa and what she has to go through to kind of earn her place, since her father was a pilot but is branded a coward because he ran during a mission and was shot down. And so that's kind of followed her whole life. And I just really enjoy it. And I think a lot of people that read like adult sci-fi and fantasy also really like this. So it's not one that should come as a surprise. But if you want to check out a full review, I have a full spoiler-free review of this book as well. Moving on, we also have Fireborn. This is a YA kind of militaristic fantasy where we follow these two different kids, a boy and a girl, who are training to be dragon riders in this army, and they're actually competing to be like the head dragon rider, like the head of the army basically. But we come to find out our main boy is actually the heir to the throne, and his family was all murdered. All of the royals were come on and they were killed, and it was just very, very violent and gruesome, and he is the only one kind of around that managed to escape, but he's been living under an assumed identity as an orphan. And then we also follow Annie, who is his best friend but also an orphan, and her family was killed during this kind of like tumultuous time by the people of his family. So it goes through some like really interesting dynamics as far as their relationship. And then of course you've got dragons, duh, gotta love dragons. And then we follow this kind of very political aspect of this story where we're asking ourselves, is this new regime actually any better than the old one? Because it might not be. It might be just as bad, but branded in a different way. So I really recommend picking this one up. This is the first book in a series, and the second book actually comes out this year, and I cannot wait to see what happens next. It was so good. Next up, we have Awakens by Elise Kova. This is actually a self-pub fantasy romance, and it definitely borders more on adult than YA. I mean, maybe NA, new adult, like that's kind of a thing that people talk about now, right? Either way, this leans older than YA. We do follow younger characters, and it is a little insta-lovey in that aspect, but from there, everything just goes off the rails. Like, it is very, very dark in this world. We follow a lot of, like, military aspects, and it's war, and, like, we're actually in the war, and not where, like, I feel like a lot of YA books kind of gloss over war and the atrocities of it. This series does not. There is definitely a cost to it, but it's so, so good. We follow this girl, Vala, who is a library assistant, and one day she ends up saving the prince, basically, and unlocking a magical power that no one has seen in hundreds of years. So it's just so, so good. I highly recommend picking this up. It's actually available on Kindle Unlimited, too, if you want to read it that way. Now we have Where Dreams Descend. This is the beautiful Owl Crate edition. And this is a debut YA fantasy where we follow this girl who kind of like lives in this big manor house where it at night is like a club that people come visit, and it's like a speakeasy, and like she performs magic. And she is a magician, a very powerful magician, but she's kind of trapped in this house. And she ends up escaping and entering herself into a competition for stage magicians. And kind of the chaos ensues. But this is such a beautiful mix match of The Greatest Showman plus Cirque du Soleil plus like Phantom of the Opera, and I just loved this book. It definitely leans into some of the darker, heavier topics, and it's just a good time. There is no like tropey YA things that I think of, right? There's no insta-love. There's no love triangles. There's none of that it's like typical YA. Not at all, right? And I love that. And I feel like a lot of YA books are moving away from that anyway. So a lot of them actually are skewing really older nowadays, which that's a whole nother conversation to discuss about like YA and why I think it's skewing older lately. But definitely love this book. It is so well written, and I think it's perfect for people that want to read YA, but they might be a little older and don't want to read like something super tropey. Pick this one up. And we can't talk about YA books that feature darker, heavier topics without talking about Scythe by Neal Shusterman. This book is crazy. I've only read the first two, but I plan to get to the last one very, very soon. I absolutely loved Scythe, but it is a lot darker than I thought it would be, especially for a YA book, because we follow Citra and Rowan, and they are kind of unwitting apprentices to become Scythe. And Scythe in this world are these people that are granted the ability to glean, which is to kill without somebody coming back to life. Because in this world, you can bring anybody back. You don't stay dead. You don't age. Like, there's no disease, and there's just none of that. But the only way that they can keep the population under control is with Scythe. So we follow that, and it just kind of opens up these really like moral conundrums about life and death, and who has the right to decide who lives and dies, and is that a technology that we want to take on? And we follow just these two characters as they're navigating this world, and it is dark, and it is violent, and it is like gruesome, and I absolutely love it. I think it's one that's really, really perfect for people that, like I said, this whole video, like to read YA but might be old like me. And the final book that I want to talk about is Crown of Feathers by Nikki Prowl-Pretto. This is the first book in a trilogy. The third book actually comes out later this year, but this is a amazing YA fantasy that definitely borders more on adult. We follow a couple of different perspectives, which is something that we don't get in YA enough. This is a multi-POV YA fantasy. And our main character is Veronica, who is this girl that wants to be a phoenix rider. She can talk to animals. She has that magic. But in this world that is like very looked down upon, if you are found to be what they call an animage, then you are either taxed to the point of starvation, or you are sold into bondage where you have to work off that like tax dollars basically. And then she kind of like ends up finding these phoenix riders and has to pretend to be a boy during the first book in order to like kind of become one of them and become a phoenix rider herself. And then we also find her, follow her sister, who is not a good person, and they kind of go back and forth a lot. And we learn a lot about their dynamic. We also follow Tristan, who is adorable and probably like my favorite character. And he is the commander's son in the Phoenix Riders. And I just love this book. It is very, very dark. I just finished book 2 and I think it is even better. It does not suffer from second book syndrome. But I think this is fantastic for people who like adult and YA fantasy because it gives you the best of both worlds, in my opinion. So hopefully you enjoyed it. These are all the books that I think are really great YA books for adult readers. Let me know what you think of any of these, or if you have any other suggestions on really good YA books that I should pick up that you think are great for older readers. All right, well, I'm Jessie. Thank you for hanging out with me, and I will talk to you next time. Bye.